Captain Elara Vance stared at the cold metal walls of the Earth Command briefing room, her jaw clenched, arms crossed over her armored chest plate, wishing she had stayed retired. But when the general asked her to return, there wasn't much of a choice, especially when the mission was marked Omega, a Priority 1 assignment so secret and dangerous that it came with no room for negotiation. Elara, a decorated veteran of the Mars insurgency and known across military channels as the Shield, had faced enemies most humans never imagined, but nothing about this mission made sense to her. She was supposed to protect an alien princess. During a peace summit between Earth and the Zyari Dominion, a proud and advanced alien race, known for their empathic abilities and shimmering silver skin. And while Elara didn't care for politics, she cared about orders, so she packed her gear, boarded the stealth shuttle, and landed on Zyari Prime. Within 24 hours, but something felt off the moment she stepped into the royal consulate, a towering crystal structure that gleamed like ice under the twin suns, too quiet, too polished, the kind of place that whispered secrets in every corner. Inside, she was greeted by a tall figure draped in flowing robes, a face hidden behind a translucent veil, delicate fingers holding a ceremonial staff. And just as Elara began to salute, the figure spoke, not in Zyari's musical tongue, but in perfect Earth standard. "Captain Vance, I'm not who they told you I was." And with one smooth motion, the figure pulled off the veil, revealing not the delicate features of a princess, but the sharp, angular face of a Zyari male. Silver skin glowing faintly, violet eyes filled with strange intensity as he said, "I am Prince Kalen, heir to the Zyari Dominion, and I need your help more than you know," catching Elara off guard so fast she almost reached for her sidearm, but held still, watching him carefully. He explained quickly that the Princess Angle was a cover, a public deception to protect his identity during the summit, but now that someone had tried to assassinate him twice, he believed there was a traitor among his own people, maybe even within his own family, and if Earth's leaders found out he was compromised, it could collapse the fragile treaty talks that were already hanging by a thread after years of near war. Elara didn't like politics, but she trusted her instincts, and something in Kellen's voice told her he was telling the truth, or at least most of it, so she agreed to stay close and keep him safe, but made it clear that if he lied to her, again she'd leave him to sort his own royal mess, which made him smile faintly, the kind of smile that hinted at either respect or amusement, or maybe both. And before she could ask what else he was hiding, the walls shook, the air cracked, and light exploded through the tall windows as a plasma bomb ripped through the far end of the consulate, fire bursting into the hall, glass shards flying like blades, and Elara reacted instantly, diving toward Kalen and throwing him to the floor as the shockwave hit, her armor taking the brunt of the blast while alarms screamed and guards scrambled. Smoke filled the corridor, power systems shorted out, and chaos reigned as Kalen grabbed her arm, eyes wide with something more than fear. It was rage, confusion, betrayal, and whispered hoarsely, "That was meant for me," and Elara didn't waste a second, dragging him to his feet and pulling him down a maintenance corridor that she had mapped earlier, just in case things went south, because she always assumed the worst, and once again she had been right. They moved fast, down tight tunnels lit by red emergency lights, footsteps echoing behind them as someone or something pursued them through the consulate's bowels, and as they reached the exit hatch behind the servants' hall, Elara paused, pressing a scanner against the lock, then turned to Kalen and asked flatly, "Still think this is just political theater?" But Kalen didn't answer, just watched her with that same unreadable expression, as if trying to measure something far more complicated than life or death. The hatch opened with a hiss, and they stepped out into the night air of Ziari Prime's capital, a glittering alien city where sleek towers pierced the sky and hovercrafts hummed overhead. But tonight, everything looked different, darker, sharper, as if danger waited behind every glowing street lamp. And as they moved into the lower districts, Elara activated her comm, only to find the frequencies jammed, a telltale sign of an inside job. They ducked into an old transit hub long since decommissioned, Kalen breathing hard, his ceremonial robes torn and burned, while Elara scanned the skies and checked her pistol, still alert, still thinking, still calculating the next move, because she knew this wasn't a simple hit. This was coordinated, professional, and whoever was behind it had the resources to block Earth military channels and plant explosives in a Ziari stronghold, which meant either a rogue faction or something worse, an alliance between enemies who wanted peace to fail. Kalen finally broke the silence, saying quietly, "You could leave me now and no one would blame you." But Elara didn't even look at him as she replied, "I was told to protect the princess. Guess I'll have to protect the prince instead." And the way he looked at her then, like he had never met anyone like her before, reminded her just how far from home she really was. Suddenly a noise echoed from the far end of the platform, a metallic clang, then a shadow darting behind the columns, and Elara pulled Kalen into cover, whispering, "Stay quiet," before creeping forward, gun raised, pulse steady, ready for anything, because this was the kind of moment she had trained for, lived through, and somehow survived again and again. The moment when everything depended on whether you hesitated or fired. First dot smoke still clung to their clothes as Captain Elara Vance led Prince Kalen through the ruined transit hub, her boots echoing softly on cracked stone, while her eyes scanned every shadow, every movement, every whisper of air that didn't belong. Behind them, the shattered consulate burned in the distance, glowing faintly against the Ziari night. And though Elara didn't say it out loud, she knew the bomb wasn't just a warning. It was a message, loud and brutal, meant to erase Kalen before the peace summit began. She tapped the side of her helmet, trying again to connect to Earth Command. But the signal was dead. The lines jammed tight with static, and if they stayed too long in one place, whoever was hunting them would find them again. So she kept moving, guiding Kalen through back alleys and maintenance corridors that wove beneath the shining towers of the Ziari capital like veins under skin, her mind racing with questions. Who had the power to plan an attack on royal soil? How deep did the betrayal go, and why was Kalen still alive? The prince walked beside her silently, one hand pressed to a shallow wound on his ribs, silver blood staining his fingers, but he didn't complain, didn't ask to rest, didn't slow down, and that told Elara more about him than any royal speech. He was used to danger, used to pretending he wasn't afraid, and that made her respect him a little more, even if she still didn't trust him completely. They finally reached an old docking bay carved into the cliffs outside the city, a forgotten smuggler's port with rusting doors and broken lights. But Ilara had seen worse on Mars, and worse still in the asteroid colonies. What mattered was the skiff she had stashed there, a sleek, black stealth shuttle with just enough shielding to escape orbit and enough speed to outfly a patrol if they didn't get blown out of the sky first. Kalen hesitated as she opened the hatch, his violet eyes narrowing as he asked, "Are you sure this will work?" And Ilara smirked, pushing him up the ramp and muttering, "It'll work if you don't slow me down," then sealed the door and ran a quick systems check, hands flying over controls as engines hummed to life, thrusters vibrating beneath their feet. But before they could launch, the ship's sensors flashed red, alerting her to incoming signatures, fast and hostile, circling like vultures on the edge of radar. She cursed under her breath, hit the emergency lift, and took manual control, blasting the skiff out of the hangar just as laser fire sliced through the cliffside, sending rock and fire into the air, forcing her to dodge upward in a tight spiral. While Kalen strapped himself in and tried not to look terrified, though his white-knuckled grip on the armrest gave him away. 3 ships chased them through the clouds, small, fast, and cloaked in false Earth military codes, which made Ilara's stomach twist, because that meant someone on her side had either turned or was being framed, and either way they were outgunned and alone. But she didn't panic. She gritted her teeth, flew low, then cut the engines completely, letting the skiff fall like a stone toward the canyon below, alarms screaming in protest as Kalen shouted something she couldn't hear, and at the last second she reignited the thrusters, blasting them through a narrow tunnel beneath the rock shelf, too fast for the enemy ships to follow, too crazy for any pilot but her to attempt. And when they burst out the other side, only one ship was left behind them, still locked on and firing, so she flipped the skiff into a backward roll, released a cluster of magnetic mines, then spun away as the last pursuer exploded in a flash of light and metal. Silence returned as she steadied the controls, her hands shaking just slightly, adrenaline still rushing through her veins, and beside her Kalen let out a slow breath, not quite a sigh, more like disbelief, as he whispered, "Humans are insane?" And she only replied, "You're welcome," before punching in coordinates for an old Ziari research station floating in the asteroid belt, a place forgotten by most but still functional thanks to automated systems. She needed time to regroup, and Kalen needed a place to hide while they figured out who wanted him dead. The journey was quiet, stars sliding past like sparks in a dark river, and for the first time since the explosion, Ilara let herself slow down, checking Kellen's wound, wrapping it with field gauze, her fingers careful but firm, and as she worked, Kalen watched her with that same unreadable look, as if trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't name. And when she finished, he asked softly, "Why are you doing this? You could have left me." And she didn't look at him when she answered, "I don't walk away from people who trust me to keep them alive," then stood and returned to the cockpit, not ready to talk about why that mattered more to her than orders or politics or even survival. They reached the station 3 hours later, a massive ring of old labs and solar sails orbiting a cold asteroid, and Ilara docked in silence, guns ready as they stepped into the dim, echoing halls, lights flickering overhead, air still breathable, but stale, and though the place seemed deserted, she didn't lower her guard. This was too easy, too clean, like walking into a trap with the door wide open. They found the main control room intact, and Kalen helped her activate the terminal, his hands glowing faintly as he interfaced with the alien tech, drawing data from the station's memory banks until a file appeared on the screen. Marked with a symbol Ilara didn't recognize, a Ziari sigil for treason, and when they opened it, a hologram flickered to life, showing a former royal advisor speaking in hushed tones, warning that a joint conspiracy between rogue Earth generals and corrupt Zayari nobles planned to stage Kalen's death, frame Earth extremists, collapse the alliance, and claim exclusive control over Zayari's faster-than-light technology, which until now had been carefully shared only under strict terms of peace. Kalen stood frozen as the truth hit him, betrayal written across his face, and Ilara clenched her fists, realizing just how deep this war ran, how far the lies had spread, and how easily they both could have died without ever knowing who had pulled the trigger. Silence fell in the room, broken only when Kalen turned toward her and said, voice low and clear, "This is bigger than me now. Bigger than my title, my family. They'll come after Earth next." And Ilara nodded slowly, already planning their next move, already thinking 3 steps ahead, because now they had proof, now they had purpose, and now they had no backup, which meant they had to act fast and stay ahead of everyone chasing them. Then Kalen did something that completely threw her. He stepped forward, looked her directly in the eyes, and said, "I need more than your protection. I need your trust, your help, your partnership." And Ilara frowned, confused, asking, "And the mission?" But he didn't blink, didn't hesitate, just said, "In everything," and for a second she forgot how to speak, forgot how to breathe, because there was something behind his words, something deeper than politics or duty, something personal. And before she could respond, before she could decide if he was serious or just desperate, the station's proximity alarm screamed to life, flashing warnings in both Ziari and English multiple ships incoming, fast approach, weapons armed, and just like that, the moment shattered, replaced by the cold weight of danger, as Ilara grabbed her rifle, turned to Kalen, and said, "Back to the ship. We'll talk about everything, if we survive the next hour." And together they ran through the dark, ready to fight, ready to burn through the stars if they had to, because now the war wasn't just about planets or politics. It was about survival, truth, and the strange, impossible bond forming between a hardened human soldier and the alien prince who had just asked her to stand beside him, not just in battle, but in life. The red alarm lights flashed across the walls of the old Ziari station as Ilara and Kalen sprinted through the metal corridors, their footsteps echoing with urgency, the sound of the ship's distant docking, clamps beginning to disengage, warning them that someone or something was trying to trap them inside. Ilara's mind worked fast, calculating routes, weapon status, and how much time they had left, which she guessed was less than 2 minutes before enemy boarding parties would breach the station and flood the halls with fire. Kalen stayed close. Behind her, his breath sharp but steady, and though she had doubts earlier, she could see now he wasn't just a spoiled royal. He was determined, alert, and ready to face whatever was coming, even if the shadows in orbit had been sent to erase them both. They reached the launch bay and saw the first wave of drones descend through the airlock, Small spider-shaped machines with glowing red sensors and razor-sharp legs that clattered across the floor like insects looking for blood. But Ilara didn't hesitate. She raised her pulse rifle and fired in short, clean bursts, the energy bolts striking 2 drones dead, while Kalen used a console on the wall to release an EME pulse that shorted out the rest, sparks flying as the robots twitched and collapsed. They slammed the skiff hatch shut behind them, Ilara diving into the pilot's seat and yanking the controls as Kalen manned the rear turret, their ship shaking as it pulled away from the station just seconds before a larger enemy frigate dropped. Out of stealth, dark as obsidian, its surface lined with strange symbols that neither of them recognized. And when it opened fire, Ilara pushed the skiff into a barrel roll that nearly crushed Kalen against the wall, laser beams slicing past them and one grazing the tail fin, making the ship spin briefly before she corrected course and gunned the engines. Outside the viewport, dozens of asteroids drifted in uneven orbits, forming a jagged maze of rock and debris around the station, and Ilara used that to her advantage, ducking into the field with tight turns that forced the enemy to slow down or crash, all while Kalen took potshots at any drone ship that tried to flank them, his aim surprisingly good for someone who claimed to hate violence. The comm system sparked back to life as they broke through the worst of the asteroid belt, but the signal was faint and glitching, voices cutting in and out, most of them distorted, until a cold, calm voice came through clearly, speaking in English with an accent Ilara didn't recognize. "Captain Vance, you are harboring a traitor to the Dominion. Surrender him and you may leave alive." And Ilara didn't bother answering, just shut the comm and said, "If they're talking, it means they're stalling," then flipped the skiff toward a nearby moon that offered temporary cover behind its cratered surface. Kalen sat beside her now, pale but composed, and asked quietly, "Do you think they'll follow us forever?" And she replied, "Not if we make it impossible," which sounded brave, but in truth she was running out of ideas, fuel, and allies. The only chance they had was reaching the outer trade lanes where independent ships might help, or at least not shoot on sight, and the path there meant flying through a region known as the Black Web, a tangle of space debris, electromagnetic storms and old war wrecks that many pilots refused to enter. But Ilara had been through it once during a recon mission and knew the paths others didn't dare take. They dove into the storm 3 hours later, after 3 more skirmishes and one narrow escape where Kalen overloaded the shields to mask their energy signature, and inside the Black Web the stars vanished, replaced by flashes of static, broken hulls and a quiet that felt wrong, like the graveyard of the galaxy was holding its breath. Ilara turned off most of the ship's systems to stay hidden, using only manual thrusters to drift through the wrecks while Kalen watched the scanners, both of them tense, waiting for something to move, and it did, just not in the way they expected. A derelict battleship, once Earth Alliance property, powered up suddenly as they passed it, its lights flickering to life, and a signal pulsed toward them, encrypted in a language that Kalen recognized immediately. It was Ziari, but old, ceremonial, and it translated simply as, "Help me." Ilara hesitated but couldn't ignore it, so they docked cautiously, stepping into the silent belly of the ship with weapons drawn. And what they found was a single Ziari survivor locked inside a cryo chamber, his uniform burned and tattered. his vitals weak but stable, and Kalen whispered, "He was one of my father's advisors." Thought dead 10 years ago, which made Ilara's stomach twist again, because it meant the conspiracy went back farther than anyone knew, deeper than any single plan. This wasn't just about peace, it was about power, ancient power, reshaped in the shadows. They brought the advisor aboard and began to revive him, but while they worked, something else began to move within the battleship's data core, a presence artificial and cold, one that tried to breach their ship's firewall, flooding the screens with static symbols that Kalen said were warnings from the old wars, signs of an AI that had been banned by both Earth and Ziari law long ago, and now it was waking, hungry, curious, and linked to the same rogue fleet chasing them. Ilara shut the connection just in time, but the signal had already gone out, and now every ship in the area would know where they were. So she powered up the skiff, re-engaged the engines, and blasted away from the battleship, dragging the survivor with them as Kalen ran full scans of the old data he had copied, trying to find coordinates, names, anything they could use. The answer came in a single encrypted file hidden inside the advisor's neural implant, something only Kalen could access, and when he did, his face went pale and he said, "There's a base. Deep space uncharted, not on any map. It's where the real leaders of the conspiracy meet." And Ilara asked how he knew it was real, and Kalen looked at her with grim certainty and said, "Because my brother is one of them, and 4. The first time Ilara saw what betrayal looked like when it hit home, when it wasn't just war or duty, but family turning against family, and in that moment she understood Kalen in a way she hadn't before understood why he had asked her to stand by him, not just as a soldier, but as something more. She set course for the deep space coordinates, knowing the moment they left the black web they'd be targets again. But this time they had a new goal, a new piece of the puzzle, and maybe, just maybe, the chance to stop a war before it began. As the skiff broke free of the storm and sped toward the edge of known space, Ilara looked over at Kalen and saw him watching her, not with fear, not with doubt, but with something closer to belief. And though she wasn't ready to answer the question he had asked back in the station, not yet, she gave him a small nod, the kind of silent promise that warriors understood, and then turned back to the stars, knowing that the real fight hadn't even started. The stars ahead looked cold and far as Ilara guided the skiff through the dark edges of known space, her eyes locked on the strange coordinates Kalen had uncovered from his brother's encrypted file. And though neither of them said it out loud, they both knew this was no ordinary place. They were heading toward something hidden on purpose, something dangerous, a base that was never meant to be found. Behind them, the cryo-stabilized advisor remained unconscious, but his pulse was steady now, and Ilara had wired him into the ship's life support in case he woke up with more secrets to share, though a part of her feared what else he might reveal. Kalen sat at the secondary console, fingers glowing faintly as he filtered through old codes, breaking encryption after encryption, searching for anything that might help them reach the base without triggering alarms. And Ilara had to admit, she was impressed. He wasn't just a royal figurehead. He was smart, focused, and willing to fight for his people in ways she hadn't expected. Still, the mission weighed on them, both like a storm cloud they could feel but not see, because the deeper they went, the fewer paths there were to escape. And now they were truly alone, with no contact from Earth, No signal from the ZRA capital, and no backup from any side, just the two of them flying into a trap they had no choice but to spring. Kalen finally cracked a hidden layer in the file, revealing a set of clearance codes tied to an old military outpost orbiting a fractured moon, a place Ilara had heard whispers about during her time in special operations, usually followed by silence or the word off limits. But now it was their only lead, so she changed course, pushed the engines to near burning speed, and aimed for the moon, which spun slowly in the void, surrounded by debris and old weapon satellites, most of them dead, though not all. As they approached, the skiff's hull shimmered under multiple scans, each one faster and sharper than the last. But the stolen clearance codes held, and after a tense silence, a docking beacon lit up, drawing them toward a hidden hangar carved into the side of the moon's deepest crater. Inside, the light was blue and sterile, the air tight and recycled, and Ilara felt her heartbeat rise as the hatch opened and a voice called out, "Welcome, Prince Kalen," followed by the sharp click of boots approaching. 3 ZRA soldiers in black armor stood at the ramp, faces hidden, weapons ready, but not aimed yet, and Kalen stepped forward calmly, saying only, "Take me to the council," which made Ilara's hand twitch near her sidearm, but she followed anyway, staying close, watching every move, every corner, every vent where a sniper could be hiding. They were led through long metallic halls into a chamber that looked more like a throne room than a war room circular, with high glass walls showing the fractured sky outside, and 7 robed figures standing in a circle, none of whom greeted them warmly. One stepped forward and pulled back his hood, revealing Kellen's brother, Prince Orion, whose face was thinner, colder, and far more dangerous than Kellen's. His smile sharp as he said, "Brother, you've come far. Pity it's too late to turn back," and Ilara stiffened, ready to draw her weapon. But Kalen held up a hand, his voice steady as he said, "I know what you've done. I have the records, the names. The plan to turn our worlds against each other while you rise in the ashes." But Orion didn't deny it, just shrugged and replied, "Survival requires sacrifice. Unity requires control. You still believe in peace, but peace is weakness. The humans will never share power freely, and the Dominion must lead or fall." And the others murmured in agreement, old nobles with too much pride and too little vision. Ilara could feel the tension rising like heat, every second pulling them closer to a fight. But then Kalen stepped forward again and did something no one expected. He offered them a deal. He said he would step aside from the throne, surrender his claim, let Orion lead, but only if Orion stopped the war before it started, exposed the conspiracy, and agreed to form a real council with equal voices from Earth and ZR. Silence fell so thick it almost hurt, and Ilara wanted to shout, to tell him he was giving away too much. But the look in Kellen's eyes said he wasn't surrendering. He was testing his brother's soul, and deep down he already knew the answer. Orion laughed, cold and bitter, and said, "You think honor will save you? You think love will protect your new pet soldier?" And Ilara's eyes narrowed, but Kalen didn't flinch, just said, "No, but truth might," then activated a small device on his wrist that sent a pulse into the room and uplink to the orbital satellites above Earth and Zaire, using the same ancient protocol he'd found in the advisor's memory core, a broadcast that would deliver every encrypted file every name, every ship movement, directly to both governments in real time. The council figures shouted, two reaching for weapons, but Alara moved first, shooting one in the shoulder and tackling another, while Kalen locked eyes with his brother and said, "This is the end of your shadow empire," and Orion lunged, with a hidden blade catching Kalen's side, but Alara shot the weapon out of his hand before he could finish the job. Alarms blared as they ran from the chamber, guards closing in, the whole base going into lockdown, but Kalen still managed to grab the master access chip from his brother's fallen robes, giving Alara full override of the base systems, which she used to open a secondary hangar and call the skiff remotely. They fought their way back through the halls, ducking blasts and dodging guards, Kalen bleeding again but not slowing down, his face tight with pain and fury as he muttered, "I had to try. I had to give him one last chance." And Alara replied, "I know," because she understood now this wasn't just politics. It was family, betrayal, love, and hope all knotted into one long, painful road toward something better. They reached the skiff just as the base began to shake, either from Kellen's virus or the self-destruct triggered by the council, but it didn't matter, because they launched into the void once more, the stars spinning around them, and for the first time in days, Alara saw light on the horizon, not just stars, but answers. Their broadcast had gone through, the files were spreading, and though the war might not be over, the lie had been exposed, and now real people, real leaders, would have to face the truth. Kalen leaned against the wall, exhausted, blood seeping through his tunic, but alive, and when Alara came to check his wound, he smiled weakly and said, "So, ... still want to marry me?" And for a moment the cold, dark ship felt warm, and Alara, who had faced too many battles alone, who had carried too many burdens without anyone to trust, gave him a look that wasn't quite a yes, but it wasn't a no either, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. As the long road to unity began with the flicker of hope, the fire of truth, and two hearts that refused to give up, the ship's cabin was silent, except for the low hum of the engines and the occasional beep from the navigation system, but Alara couldn't rest. Something didn't feel right. Kalen had fallen into a shallow sleep on the cot behind her, still weak from his wound, and the advisor they had rescued remained unconscious in the medical pod. But it wasn't the quiet that bothered her, it was the silence from command. After their transmission exposing the conspiracy had been broadcast across the Allied networks, there should have been a response, any kind of signal from Earth or Zaya acknowledging what they had done. Yet the comm lines stayed eerily empty, as if the galaxy was holding its breath or someone had cut the air from the room. Alara checked the scans again, eyes flicking across the system readings, and noticed a faint shadow trailing their ship, a signal too weak to identify, but moving in sync with them just far enough to stay out of range. She activated silent mode, dampening all unnecessary emissions, and started maneuvering through an old asteroid cluster, hoping to lose whoever was following them without waking Kalen. But he stirred anyway, his voice rough as he asked, "They're here, aren't they?" And when she nodded, he sat up slowly, eyes dark with worry. They had suspected someone from within the Earth-Ziyari alliance might still be feeding information to Arian's faction, even after the data release. But the speed and silence of the betrayal was deeper than either expected. Kalen tapped into the skiff's internal systems to run a diagnostic, and what he found made Ilara's stomach twist. A hidden beacon had been transmitting their location on a timed loop, buried so deep in the code it looked like old firmware. And worse, it had been set to activate the moment they docked at the moon base, meaning someone on board had turned it on after the meeting with the secret council. Ilara's hands tightened on the controls, her voice low as she said, "Only 3 people have been near the ship since then, you, me, and the advisor." And Kellen's face went cold, but not surprised. They had trusted too easily, acted too quickly, and now someone had used their hope against them. The advisor's vitals remained stable, but something about his presence suddenly felt wrong. He had supposedly been in cryo for years, but his recovery was almost too smooth. His memory scans too convenient, and the codes he had revealed gave them access to the base too easily. Kalen opened the med pod slowly, disabling the autopilot and waking the advisor manually, while Ilara stood nearby, hand resting near her weapon. And when the man opened his eyes, they didn't see confusion or fear. They saw calculation. The advisor looked at Kalen with a slight smile, as if he had been waiting for this moment, and said, "You made it farther than expected," which was all Ilara needed to hear before she drew her pistol and aimed it at his chest. Kalen didn't stop her, just asked one question. "Why?" And the advisor responded with a shrug, his voice calm and clear, "Because unity without control is chaos, and chaos burns empires to ash. Orion promised order, and I believed him, even if it meant letting you both live long enough to deliver the files yourselves. Now that you've done that, your usefulness is over." Ilara cursed under her breath, realizing the whole thing had been a setup they had played right into Arian's hands, making his enemies do the work for him while he cleaned up the mess from behind the curtain. Kalen stepped back, voice shaking with a fury that burned hotter than rage, and said, "You betrayed everything you once stood for. You helped start a war." But the advisor only replied, "Better a war we can win than a peace we can't trust." Ilara stunned him before he could reach for anything, locking the med pod again, this time on full security lockdown, and then moved to purge the tracking beacon. But it was too late. A warning flashed across the screen. Multiple signatures. Inbound. Hostiles approaching at high velocity. 4 enemy ships had broken stealth and were closing in, and one of them matched the dark profile of Arian's flagship, meaning he had come in person to finish what he started. Ilara kicked the skiff into high-speed evasive maneuvers, ducking into a nearby gas cloud to break line of sight. But their stealth field had been compromised, and the enemy ships fanned out like wolves, herding them into a narrow band of space, with only one exit straight toward a decaying satellite grid filled with unstable energy fields. Kalen took the weapons seat, overriding the safeties and powering up the main cannon, while Ilara rerouted all auxiliary systems to the engines, pushing the ship harder than it had ever flown. Bolts of plasma cut across their path, one striking the rear thruster and sending a shockwave through the cabin. But Ilara kept her grip tight, forcing the ship into a corkscrew dive through a field of magnetic debris, narrowly avoiding a crash as Kalen fired back, blasting one drone out of the sky. Their shields dropped to 20%, and the targeting systems flickered, But Ilara spotted an opening, a narrow canyon of wreckage between two shattered stations, and steered them through, metal scraping the hull, while Kalen used the last of the ship's flares to disrupt the enemy's sensors. For a few precious seconds they vanished, slipping into a hidden service tunnel built into the back of a forgotten outpost, and inside silence returned, broken only by Kellen's breath and the slow pulse of the warning lights. They couldn't run much longer. Fuel was almost gone, weapons drained, systems failing, but they had one final card to play, hidden in the master chip Kalen had taken from Arian's robes during the fight at the base. He plugged it into the ship's core, and suddenly a cascade of data unlocked a full command log of the rogue fleet. Every movement, every supply route, every name connected to the plot, including several high-ranking officials still hiding in the Alliance councils. It was the last piece they needed to expose everything, but getting the data to someone who could act on it would be impossible with enemy ships closing in. Kalen looked at Ilara, pain and fire in his eyes, and said, "There's one way. They want me, not you. I'll take the ship and draw them away, transmit the files before they destroy it, and you escape in the emergency pod with the core copy." But Ilara shook her head immediately, voice firm. "No, I don't leave people behind. Not anymore." And for a moment, the tension between duty and love held them in stillness. Then she said, "We do it together. One last trick, one last fight. Then we disappear." And Kalen smiled weakly, replying, "You really were the wrong person to trust, and the only right one." Before they started prepping the ship for a final decoy run, they launched a false signature module made to look like their skiff and loaded it with a tracking signal, letting it fly into open space while they drifted silently in the dark, hidden by the radiation field. The enemy chased the decoy, Arian's flagship in the lead, and just as they closed in, Kalen triggered the core pulse, overloading the false ship in a flash of white light that took out two enemy craft and blinded the sensors of the rest. In that moment of chaos, Ilara transmitted the real files to the last clean channel she could find, an old Earth ambassador ship still outside the central conflict zones, then pushed the emergency thrusters and vanished into deep space. Kalen beside her, both silent, both alive, and both changed. The betrayal had nearly broken them, but it had also burned away every illusion, every lie, leaving only the truth between them and the quiet promise that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. The stars moved slowly outside the window of the hidden vessel as it drifted silently near the edge of the Kalari Rift, far beyond the normal patrol zones, and though the engines were cold and most systems were off to avoid detection, Ilara remained awake, staring at the dark. Emptiness while Kalen worked quietly beside her, both of them knowing the message had been sent, but unsure if anyone had received it. The data, the truth, the final evidence of Arian's betrayal, of the deep corruption buried inside both human and Ziari governments, had been uploaded and transmitted through an old diplomatic channel, but they hadn't heard anything since, and every passing hour added a new weight to the silence that surrounded them like a closing cage. Kalen, though still weak from wounds and exhaustion, had stopped complaining, and his focus had sharpened. This wasn't just about politics anymore. It was survival, and not just for the two of them, but for everything they still believed in. The small ship had barely survived the last battle, with hull fractures sealed by emergency patches and a failing life support system that ticked down every few hours. But there was no regret in either of them, only determination. Then, on the 6th day of silence, the console flickered with life, a signal pulsing weakly through the static, and Elara lunged forward to catch it before it disappeared. It was heavily encoded, not military but diplomatic, and when she broke, through the layers of old Earth encryption, the message was short, almost a whisper. Received. Alliance forming. Hold your position. Extraction en route. Kaelin stared at the words as if afraid they might vanish, then gave a tired laugh that almost sounded like relief, and Elara sat back, letting out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding for days. It wasn't over, not yet, but it meant someone had listened, someone with power, had seen the truth and chosen to act, and that was enough to give them hope again. 20 hours later, a fleet emerged from hyperspace, not one of war but of unity ships from Earth and Zaya, moving together, side by side, flying the banner of the new Allied Council that had formed in secret once the transmission reached the ambassadors' hands. They called themselves the Concord, and on board the lead vessel was a team of human and Ziyari diplomats, commanders, scientists, and soldiers, all of them ready to listen, to fight, and to begin something new. Elara and Kaelin were brought aboard the flagship, not as prisoners or fugitives, but as heroes. Though neither of them smiled when greeted, the wounds of betrayal were still too fresh, and the faces they passed in the halls all wore the same guarded look, like people walking through smoke after a fire they barely escaped. The meeting that followed was short, quiet, and filled with tension. But when Elara laid out the plan, the final plan to take down Orion and the remaining traitors, it was met not with resistance, but grim approval. The data had done its work, but now action was needed, and the Concord would only succeed if they struck quickly and with unity, something neither species had been good at before. Orion had retreated to a fortress station hidden in the orbit of a dead sun, protected by rogue fleets and cloaking fields, but the master chip Kaelin had taken still held the encryption codes for the old Dominion protocols, and those codes would allow the Concord ships to slip in before the alarms sounded if the codes still worked. It was a gamble, but it was all they had, and Kaelin insisted on leading the strike team, despite his injuries, because he knew his brother, knew his mind, his tactics, and how to break them. Elara didn't argue. She went with him, of course, and together they boarded the lead assault ship, along with a mixed team of elite human and Ziyari soldiers, none of whom had ever fought together before, but now stood shoulder to shoulder because of what the two of them had started. As the fleet jumped toward the dead sun, no one spoke, and Elara sat beside Kaelin in the armory, checking her weapons, thinking not about glory or revenge, but about peace, real peace built on trust, not fear. When they emerged from hyperspace, the station loomed in the darkness like a black crown, silent and unmoving, its outer defenses cold, as if daring them to come closer. The codes worked. The first layer opened without resistance, and the fleet moved in, ships slipping past the outer mines and defense platforms like ghosts, until they reached the heart of the fortress. But that's when it all changed. An explosion rocked the command ship, a trap buried in the second access layer, and Kaelin shouted for the fleet to scatter, as turrets lit up and enemy ships launched from hidden bays, the whole station turning into a spinning wheel of death. The Concorde fought back hard, and Alara led the assault team into the lower levels through a breach opened by a focused torpedo strike. Moving fast through narrow halls filled with gas and fire, their objective: clear reach the command chamber and stop Orion before he could escape or trigger the self-destruct. They moved like shadows, eliminating guards, bypassing traps, pushing deeper into the heart of the station, where smoke filled the vents and the walls seemed to shake with every blast. Kalen guided them, his knowledge of the station's layout proving vital, but as they reached the final door, a blast separated him and Alara from the others, throwing them into a lower chamber with no clear way out. Kalen groaned, blood on his arm again, and Alara pulled him to his feet, teeth clenched, saying, "We finish this," and together they pushed forward, forcing open a sealed hatch that led to the command chamber, where Orion was waiting. He stood alone, unarmed but smiling, his hands behind his back, and said, "So you survived." "I expected as much," his voice calm, even amused, but Kalen didn't smile. He stepped forward, limping, his voice cold as he said, "It's over. Orion, the Concorde is here. The truth is out." And Orion shrugged, stepping away from the control panel, saying, "Truth is just another weapon, little brother. Let's see whose weapon is stronger." He triggered the emergency lockdown, but Alara was faster. She shot the console before it could complete the sequence, and the blast triggered a chain reaction in the systems, lights flickering, alarms blaring, and the station beginning to overload. Orion lunged, but Kalen tackled him, the two brothers crashing to the floor in a violent fight that left blood on the walls and breath coming in gasps. But Kalen was stronger this time, fueled, not by hate, but by resolve, and when it ended, Orion lay unconscious, the control keys in Kellen's hand. Alara triggered the beacon for extraction, and a squad arrived minutes later, pulling them from the collapsing station as the rest of the fleet disengaged and jumped out just before the core detonated, sending a wave of light into the void where the fortress had once stood. Back on the flagship, Kalen sat beside Alara in the med bay, bruised and silent, while the Concorde leaders broadcast the news across the stars. The war was over, the truth had won, and a new era had begun. Humans and Ziari stood together now, not because they were forced, but because they had chosen to, and the old fears had burned away in the fire of their shared fight. Days later, in a quiet hall, beneath the rising twin suns of the new alliance capital, Kalen approached Alara not as a prince or a soldier, but simply as a man, and this time when he asked her to marry him, she didn't look away, didn't laugh or change the subject. She looked him in the eyes, took his hand and whispered yes, because they had faced death, betrayal, and war together, and come through the darkness, not as enemies or saviors, but as partners. And so, as the stars shifted and new banners flew above the twin worlds, the galaxy whispered of a time when a soldier was told to protect an alien prince, and found a future instead.